You tithe. You pray. You show up. You declare the promises out loud in an empty room because you believe the word is true even when the numbers don't move. And then Monday comes, and the account says what it said last month, and the month before that. And somewhere in the back of your mind, not in the part you'd say out loud in church, but in the part that runs quietly while you're trying to fall asleep, the question shows up. Maybe the promises work for other people. Maybe faithfulness has a ceiling you haven't been told about. Maybe the undisciplined person next to you is actually ahead of you financially, because something in this system is broken and nobody's willing to say it. I'm going to say it. You are not behind because of what you lack. You are behind because of what you repeat every single day. The poverty you are experiencing is not a faith deficit. It is a behavioral pattern, specific, identifiable, and documented in Scripture with a precision that should make you uncomfortable. Because God didn't just promise increase. He identified the exact daily mechanisms that lock it. And if you are running any one of them inside your 24-hour routine, no seed you plant will break the cycle. Tithing cannot override a habit God already labeled a financial lock. Prayer cannot cancel a mechanism Scripture already named as poverty's engine. In this video, I'm going to give you 7 of them. Not 7 motivational categories. 7 specific daily behaviors, each one sourced directly from the text, that block financial increase regardless of how faithful your giving is or how consistent your prayer life has become. By the end of this, you will be able to audit your own routine, identify which pattern is working against you, and apply the biblical replacement with precision. No sentiment, no inspiration, mechanism and fix. That's all this is. The first mechanism is not about how much you spend. It is about the sequence in which you spend. And most believers have the sequence backwards without knowing it. Proverbs 3:9 is one of the most cited verses in stewardship conversations, and it is almost universally misread. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of all your produce. The word first fruits is not poetic. It is sequential. It means the first portion of what comes in is allocated before anything else is touched, not the remainder after expenses, not what survives the month. The first movement of income is directional. It goes toward a specific allocation before the consuming begins. What most believers practice is the opposite sequence. Income arrives. Expenses are covered. Living costs are funded. Entertainment, food, subscriptions, comfort, all of it runs before the allocation happens. And then at the end, if there is something left, it gets given, saved, or invested. That sequence is not stewardship. Scripture calls it something else. Haggai 1:6 describes a people who earn wages and put them into a bag with holes. The image is precise. The income is real. The effort is real. But the sequence is wrong, and everything leaks before it can compound. The mechanical fix is not generosity. It is sequencing. First fruits means your first financial action after income arrives is allocation, giving, savings, and investment, before a single consumption expense is paid. The moment you reverse the sequence, you change the structure of your financial system at the level of its foundation. Every dollar that enters your life will now flow through a different gate. That is not a spiritual metaphor. It is a cash flow architecture decision, and Scripture mandated it before modern financial planning had a name for it. The second mechanism will cost you a relationship if you take it seriously. That is exactly why most people don't. Proverbs 13:20 is direct. Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. The word companion here does not mean a distant acquaintance. It means the person whose financial logic you absorb on a daily basis. The person whose decisions you observe closely enough that their patterns begin to feel normal to you. And Proverbs does not soften the outcome. Harm, not inconvenience, not delay. Harm. Here is the mechanism. Financial behavior is socially calibrated. The people in your immediate environment set your unconscious baseline for what is normal to spend, normal to save, normal to risk, and normal to delay. If the people you talk to daily about money are people who consume without allocating, who avoid difficult financial conversations, who normalize debt and rationalize it with humor, who view saving as deprivation and investment as something for wealthy people, their logic will enter your routine, not through a dramatic moment of compromise, through daily absorption. You will begin to feel that your discipline is excessive, You will feel social pressure to participate in consumption events you cannot afford. You will hear their rationalizations so frequently that they will start to sound reasonable. And then one day you will make a decision using their framework while believing you made it using yours. The scriptural diagnosis is proximity, not their character, not their worth as people, their proximity to your financial decision-making. The fix is not to abandon relationships. It is to audit which voices have access to your financial reasoning, and to deliberately increase your exposure to people whose financial outcomes you want to replicate. If you cannot find them in your physical environment, find them in books, in documented case studies, in structured communities. The discipline required to protect your financial reasoning from undisciplined input is not arrogance. Scripture calls it wisdom, and it calls the alternative harm. The third mechanism is inside a passage most people have heard, and none have applied to their daily schedule with the precision it requires. Proverbs 6 contains one of the most uncomfortable passages in the entire wisdom literature on this subject. Go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. How long will you lie there, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come upon you like a robber, and want like an armed man. The mechanism named here is not laziness in the dramatic sense. It is the daily accumulation of small surrenders, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands. Each one feels inconsequential. Each one is. But Scripture describes the compounding of these small decisions as the pathway through which poverty arrives with the force of an armed man. Not gradually, not predictably. It arrives with violence, the text says, because the damage was accumulating invisibly while the small compromises felt harmless. The strategic hours referred to here are not the hours of labor. They are the hours before the day demands you, the hours in which deliberate work on your financial architecture, your skill development, your secondary income mechanisms, your planning, your review of what you built and what you need to build next. That work happens before the reactive demands of the day consume all available capacity. The ant has no supervisor. She acts on internal structure during the season of preparation before the harvest arrives. The modern version of this mechanism is not sleeping until noon. It is the nightly consumption of passive entertainment during the hours that could be used to develop the skill, the plan, or the system that changes your financial trajectory. It is choosing distraction during the only discretionary hours available to you because the content is effortless and the development is hard. Scripture does not call that rest. It names the outcome with precision. Poverty like an armed man. The fix is a daily time audit. Identify the hours between your final obligation of the day and sleep. Document what currently fills them. Then ask a single question. Is what happens in these hours increasing my capacity or consuming it? The answer to that question is the diagnosis. The fourth mechanism is about isolation, not ignorance. Isolation. Proverbs 15:22 does not leave room for interpretation. Without counsel, plans fail, but with many advisors, they succeed. And Proverbs 11:14 repeats the structure. Where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in an abundance of counselors there is safety. The pattern described here is not the absence of prayer before a decision. It is the absence of structured input from people with competence in the domain where the decision will be made. And the consequence Scripture names is not delay or suboptimal results. Plans fail. The language is categorical. Here is why this is a daily behavior rather than an occasional mistake. The decisions that determine your financial trajectory are not dramatic, singular moments. They are a continuous stream of small choices. Whether to take on this debt, whether to accept this contract, whether to invest in this tool, whether to price this service at this rate, whether to allocate to this expense or defer it. These small decisions compound into your financial architecture, the same way the small surrenders in the previous block compound into poverty. And if you are making them in isolation, relying only on your own reasoning, your own emotional state on that particular day, your own limited exposure to outcomes, you are operating below the structural capacity God identified as necessary for plans to succeed. Intelligence applied without external counsel in a domain where your blind spots are invisible to you is not wisdom. Scripture is specific about this. The abundance of counselors is what produces safety, not one trusted friend, not a prayer and a feeling of peace. Structured exposure to multiple competent perspectives before significant decisions are executed. The fix is deliberate. Before any financial decision above a threshold you define, and you need to define it, you are required by your own system to obtain structured input from at least two people whose outcomes in that domain you respect. Not validation, not permission, informed pushback. The person who agrees with you immediately is not a counselor. The person who asks the question you hadn't thought to ask is. The fifth mechanism is in Scripture more times than most people have ever noticed, and it is almost never discussed in financial teaching because it is socially difficult to name. Proverbs 6:1-5. My son, if you have put up security for your neighbor, have given your pledge for a stranger. If you are snared in the words of your mouth, caught in the words of your mouth, then do this, my son, and save yourself, for you have come into the hand of your neighbor. Go, hasten, and plead urgently with your neighbor. Give your eyes no sleep, and your eyelids no slumber. Save yourself like a gazelle from the hand of the hunter, like a bird from the hand of the fowler. The image used is a trap. You are caught, and the instruction that follows is not to pray about it. It is to move immediately and urgently to extract yourself from the agreement. The text does not soften the diagnosis. It says save yourself. It uses the language of predatory danger. The gazelle, the hunter, the bird, the trap. This is not a mild caution. This is Scripture treating co-signing and financial guarantees as a category of emergency. The mechanism is liability transfer. When you co-sign a loan, guarantee a debt, or pledge your financial standing as security for another person's obligation, you have taken on an exposure whose execution is entirely outside your control. The other person's discipline, the other person's stability, the other person's priorities. None of these are yours to manage, but the financial consequence of their failure is now yours to absorb. You have voluntarily introduced an uncontrollable variable into your financial architecture, and Scripture names that decision a snare. The relational pressure that leads to this behavior is real. The person asking is often someone you love. The refusal feels like a rejection, but the biblical framework here does not weigh the relationship against the financial risk and find them equal. It treats the guarantee itself as a mechanism of financial destruction, serious enough to warrant the imagery of a hunter and a trap. The fix is a non-negotiable rule you establish before the emotional situation arrives, because you will not reason clearly when someone you care about is asking you directly. The rule is, I do not co-sign, not because I don't trust you, because Scripture identified this as a snare, and I have chosen to take that identification seriously. That rule, established in advance, removes the decision from the emotional moment and places it inside a framework you already committed to. The sixth mechanism is where the most disciplined people in this audience will feel the most resistance, because it does not describe the lazy, it describes the ambitious. Proverbs 13:11 is precise. Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. And Proverbs 28:20 provides the companion indictment. A faithful man will abound with blessings, but whoever hastens to be rich will not go unpunished. The mechanism here is not greed in the abstract. It is the behavioral pattern of consistently prioritizing high-return opportunities with compressed timelines over lower-return systems with long compounding cycles. And the reason this is a daily behavior rather than a one-time mistake is that the temptation presents itself continuously, in different forms, at different moments, an investment that promises exceptional returns in a short window, a business opportunity that bypasses the slow stages of legitimate development, a financial shortcut that seems to offer what years of discipline would otherwise produce. Each individual instance feels reasonable. The mathematics of the promised return look compelling. The person offering it has credibility. The window is closing. And so the decision gets made, repeatedly, inside a framework that Scripture already diagnosed as a pathway to loss. The compounding damage is not just financial, it is architectural. Every time capital is directed toward a rapid return mechanism and lost, the base from which slow compounding could operate is reduced. And slow compounding, gathering little by little, is the only mechanism Scripture validates with the word increase. Not because God disfavors wealth, because the structure of gathered wealth is different from the structure of acquired wealth. Gathered wealth has a foundation. Acquired wealth has a transaction. The practical fix requires you to establish, in advance, a filter for financial opportunities. The filter contains one primary question: does this opportunity require me to accept a return timeline that I cannot verify through the normal operation of a legitimate system? If the answer is yes, the opportunity fails the filter regardless of who is presenting it or how compelling the mathematics appear. You exit the conversation. You protect the base. You return to the slow system, little by little. That is the word Scripture uses. And the outcome it attaches to that phrase is increase. The same outcome you are currently trying to produce through mechanisms the text already named as punishment. The seventh mechanism is the final one, and it is the most confrontational, because it does not require you to stop doing something. It requires you to see something you are currently refusing to see. Luke 16:10. One who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. The logic here is not motivational. It is structural. The capacity to manage much is demonstrated and developed through the management of little. If the small is being managed poorly, the infrastructure required to hold more does not exist, and more arriving before the infrastructure is built does not produce increase. It produces a larger version of the same problem. The daily behavior this describes is the avoidance of detailed engagement with your current financial reality. Most people who are frustrated with their financial position do not have a precise current accounting of every dollar that enters and leaves their life in a given week. They have an approximate sense, a general feeling, a rough awareness. And within that approximation, small losses accumulate invisibly. Subscriptions that no longer serve any function. Recurring expenses that were established under different circumstances and never reviewed. Spending patterns that feel normal because they are habitual rather than intentional. The mechanism is not extravagance. It is invisibility. The money leaving your life that you cannot account for because you are not looking precisely enough to see it. And Scripture names the consequence of this pattern with structural logic. If you cannot demonstrate faithfulness in the management of what is small and currently in your hands, the architecture for receiving more does not exist. The breakthrough you are waiting for is contingent on the stewardship of what you already have, not as a spiritual test, but as a structural prerequisite. The fix is a weekly review, not monthly, weekly. Every 7 days you open every account, every statement, every transaction, and you account for every dollar that moved. You are not looking for dramatic problems. You are looking for the invisible leaks, the small, normalized expenses that were never intentionally chosen and are never consciously renewed. Each one you find and eliminate or intentionally confirm is an act of faithfulness in a very little. And according to the text, that is the exact behavior that qualifies you structurally for the management of much. 7 mechanisms, each one named by Scripture, before you arrived at this problem. You are not failing because you lack faith. You are failing because one or more of these patterns is running inside your daily routine, and no amount of giving or declaring or believing will override a mechanical lock that God already identified by name. Go back through the list. Not quickly, slowly. Ask one question for each item. Is this present in my 24-hour routine right now? Not in theory, not occasionally, as a pattern. If the answer is yes, you have your diagnosis. And a diagnosis is not condemnation. It is the beginning of precision. Apply the fix, not the inspiration. The fix. Adjust the sequence. Protect the proximity. Guard the hours. Seek the counsel. Remove the liability. Slow the timeline. Look at what you have. The blueprint was already given. You just needed to read it precisely enough to use it. If you want to go deeper into the structural side of this, the link is below.